Circuit Rider, part number 5. Bobby Jack's priority, after arriving in one of the larger towns located on his route to North Carolina, was finding a store that sold Bibles. In the 19th century, before the Second Great Awakening, Bibles were not the best seller they would become during and after the Civil War. After inquiring from some of the local stores about the best place to find Bibles, he was told they did not know who was a dealer in that literature. An old man sitting on a bench inside one of the stores heard Bobby Jack's request for information. The old man followed Bobby Jack out of the store and asked him to hold up because he could tell him where to find all the Bibles he wanted. Before Bobby Jack could acknowledge the old man, he said, "Young fella, you are one of those preachers they call circuit riding preachers, aren't you?" Bobby Jack shook the man's hand and said, "Yes, sir, I am." The old man told Bobby Jack the man who printed the local paper could print as many copies as you wanted. "I believe he is a Christian, and several of the preachers and circuit riders use him to supply Bibles for their ministry." Bobby Jack thanked the old man, and before he had a chance to witness to the old man, he turned and walked away. Bobby Jack started to run after him, but decided he would ask for forgiveness for not asking the old man if he knew Jesus. When Bobby Jack walked into the print shop, he could feel the presence of the Lord. A lady sitting at a desk asked him if she could help him with something. He told her he wanted to purchase some Bibles. She smiled at him and said her husband had several pre-printed Bibles, and she pointed him to a corner of the building and a table stacked high with Bibles. Some had leather bindings, and some were just plainly bound. As Bobby Jack placed his hand on the Bibles and checked the expert bindings, a tall man about Bobby Jack's age came up beside him and said hello. This man, who was the bookbinder, had no doubts as to what Bobby Jack's mission was, and the man, who introduced himself as Jim, asked Bobby Jack his destination. Bobby Jack said Slabtown, North Carolina. When Bobby Jack said this, Jim got a frown on his face and said, "If you can get into that community without being shot, it will be a miracle. I can warn you about the name Slabtown. That is a derogatory name people in those parts came up with. That community is called Pleasant Valley by the people who live there. From the stories circulating around in that part of North Carolina, that name sure doesn't fit the reputation of the folks living there." Bobby Jack thanked Jim for cluing him in on the name of the community. Bobby Jack said he would like to purchase 5 Bibles and one of the leather-bound copies. Jim told Bobby Jack he supplied most of the Bibles to the churches that were springing up and to the circuit riders that visited these churches. He was supplying these Bibles for the cost of supplies and wanted to donate his labor to the spreading of the good news. Jim continued to tell Bobby Jack all he knew about Pleasant Valley, North Carolina. After a long and enjoyable conversation with Jim, Bobby Jack placed the Bibles in his saddlebags and continued his journey to Pleasant Valley, North Carolina, also known as Slabtown. Bobby Jack had a new feeling of urgency as he continued his journey. He was glad he had been warned about the name of the community. One thing Bobby Jack did not want to do is start off on the wrong foot, calling a community a derogatory slang name. The chance meeting with Jim and his ability to supply quality Bibles reinforced Bobby Jack's feelings that God was with him on this mission, and he had a new feeling of urgency about his mission trip. Each mile of the trip to North Carolina was a new experience. Bobby Jack was seeing the countryside like he would never have experienced it if he had not started this mission trip. He was thinking back to his family and the Simpson farm, and when he would stop to rest, he had to admit he was homesick. He wondered what Skip was doing and wished he could have taken Skip on this mission trip. Bobby Jack saw the dark clouds forming in the west, and it looked like a storm was brewing, and he was alone and in an area that was not populated. In most storms, he would stay on his horse and ride through it. But from the looks of the clouds, this could be a storm like he had not experienced before, especially alone with his horse and his first time away from home.